In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the RLA Extended Response section. I'm Nick Bascom, and I'm excited to show you how to master this part of the GED test. After this lesson, you are going to know how to analyze arguments. We're going to get two of them, right, with the GED RLA Extended Response section. We need to know how to analyze those, what they're claiming, what the evidence is that they're providing to support. And we also need to learn how to evaluate them, how to say which one of them we prefer to the other one. So we're really going to learn how to analyze an argument. We're also going to learn how to outline and plan a response to that argument. We're also really going to look closely at the specific requirements for scoring well in the extended response section. So you're going to know exactly what you need to accomplish to get that target score. Okay, so let's keep diving. Let's make sure we know in general what the RLA extended response section entails. Well, like I said before, we need to read two passages, and then we need to write an analysis about those two passages in the text box. We need to say which one we prefer. We need to evaluate it in light of the evidence that it provides. And we even need to deal with that other passage too, in terms of discussing why we didn't choose it. There's a lot that goes into mastering this extended response section. Now, in terms of the timing, we will have 45 minutes to do everything. Read, plan, type, revise, everything. We have 45 minutes to accomplish that. But once you see the steps that we can take and how we can master this process, 45 minutes is going to feel like plenty of time. Okay, so one thing that's very important to know about the extended response section is that it makes up about 20% of our total score. So it is a big chunk of our points, which is why this session is so important. Okay, so we said we were going to start talking about the different things that we need to do to get a really great score. Well, we're going to get started right now. One of the things that, it's very important for us to understand is that we are scored on different criteria. We are scored on our ability to analyze, how well we develop our own essay, including the organization of that essay, and even though it's very minimal in terms of the overall score, we still need to make sure that we pay attention to how well we conform to sort of standard grammatical and spelling conventions. Okay, so how we can analyze a passage, how we can develop our response, including how well we organize that response into individual paragraphs. And then, of course, at the very end, we need to make sure we proofread so that we can avoid those big-time spelling and grammatical errors. All right, so we're starting to get a sense of what we need to do to get top points. All right, let's dive into the guidelines a little bit. All right, so they're going to provide the guidelines the entire time we read a passage. But, of course, we want to have these memorized before we ever take the test so that we never have to reread the instructions. Like, okay, it's the extended response. I know what I'm doing. Let's get to it. It gives us more time, right, to spend on the actual task in the 45 minutes we know that we have. All right, let's run through these guidelines so that we're feeling more comfortable with them so we don't have to reread them on test day. Of course, we know, we've seen this a couple times, we get 45 minutes max. Here's a big takeaway from that, though, and that is don't rush. We're going to have a method, a process. So we're going to know how to attack this in a way that leads to points that avoids rushing, right? Which can lead to sloppy writing and more mistakes. So we're going to avoid that. All right. Definitely want to make sure that in those 45 minutes, we read those passages closely and we dissect them. We think about what's their central message? What is the evidence the author provides to support that message? Definitely make sure you do not rush through that step. Spend your time there. Of course, we also want to make sure that we think about what our response will be, okay? Which means we need to outline, and part of our time will be spent outlining. Make sure you plan before you begin. It will help your writing, I promise. Okay, so we've got some tips here. Next, length. Students always ask this in class. How long should it be? Well, in general, I want you to focus more on making sure your writing is strong and effective. That's the most important thing. But here's a general sense of how long, how extensive your essay should be. It should be between 4 to 7 paragraphs, And each of those paragraphs should be 3 to 7 sentences each. Okay? Now that can add up, but remember, if we write something super, super short, we're not going to get the score that we're looking for. All right, so if we fit within this range, we're going to be okay in terms of the length. Okay, so we got a couple guidelines down. Let's get a few more. Remember, the more we have these memorized, the better off we're going to be on test day because we won't have to read them a second time. All right, so something very important is that as you are reading through those passages, you want to pay close attention to what is called argumentation, right? Basically, the component pieces of an argument. That means you really want to focus on claims, what the author's point or perspective is. Then you want to pay close attention to how that author supports those claims with evidence and reasoning, okay? And you also want to evaluate that evidence and that reasoning. Does it come from a credible source? Is the source named? All this stuff is very, very important in our evaluation of the author's ability to construct a persuasive, strong argument. Okay, so as we write our essay, here are a lot of little things that we want to keep in mind. First, of course, we want to make sure that we identify which position is better supported. Pick a side. Make sure it's very clear, too, in your thesis, which side you are taking. Okay, so look for the essay that you feel like is supported by more evidence, by better evidence, right? Which one has more credible sources, or even the speculation makes a little bit more sense to you. Go with that one. Now, here's another really huge point, is that when you are writing up your own essay, you need to make sure you explain why the position you chose is the better one. Don't just say that it's better and then describe what it says. You need to look at its support and say how or why that support helps the argument to be better. Okay? So remember, explaining the evidence and how it supports the argument is much more important than just listing what it says. Okay, so one thing that sometimes gets people, tripped up a little bit is they think, wow, geez, I really don't support this argument. I would never argue that in real life, but it's definitely the better argument. What do I do? Well, remember, it doesn't matter what side you take. There's no wrong or right side to take. And nobody's ever going to see this essay other than the graders. So you don't need to worry about taking a position that you really detest, right? The only thing we are concerned about is making sure we write the best possible essay we can write. If that means you end up sort of defending the position that you don't agree with, that's okay. That's okay for the purpose of this exercise. To get the most points, that's what we want to do here. Okay, so remember, as we explain the position that we're going to support, we need to make sure that we defend that position by citing evidence from the passage. We don't want our entire essay just to be, simply restating what the passage itself has said, but we do want to use and integrate quotations or pieces of evidence from that passage as we explain how it's helping our passage, okay? We also want to make sure that we develop and organize, which means build your main points thoroughly, have strong topic sentences, have paragraphs full of good evidence and solid reasoning to support your position. We also really want to make sure, too, that we build our essay in a logical order. And, that means maybe we start with a strong point. Maybe we finish with a good point that might be a nice tie-in to the other passage that we're not supporting. We're going to take a look at a template here in a little bit where we really fully flesh out what this means, to pick your key points and to sort of process them in a logical order. Okay, so of course, how we organize is part of that order. And we also want to be thinking about the classic rhetorical triangle, which is always, okay, who am I speaking to? And what's the purpose and message what's the purpose of the message that I'm giving to my audience? Okay? Always think about that. You also want to think about the rhetorical situation coming from the passages that you're getting. That might help you evaluate and analyze them, right? Who's speaking? What's their message? What is their audience, right? Those types of triangles, right? We get triangles all around, can help us sort of, develop and structure our own essays. Something that's very important for organization is using transitions effectively. Transitions within paragraphs can be really strong. Transitions between paragraphs are absolutely essential. Think keywords like first, furthermore, finally, however, yet, but, nevertheless. All these different kinds of transition keywords can really help us form a really powerful and a really well-flowing essay as well. All right, word choice. We know that word choice is important. Choose your words carefully. All right, words can be powerful, obviously very powerful items in this essay, so we want to be very careful with our word choice. Something that can really help the flow of your essay, but also the interest, sort of maintaining the interest of your reader, is to vary your sentence structure. Sometimes people forget about that, but if you have too many sentences in a row that sort of have the same structure, then it can be repetitive and redundant, and the essay doesn't quite read as well. But if we vary that sentence structure, maybe because we have some left branching sentences, those are sentences that sort of start with maybe a dependent or modifying clause before we get to the main clause, or right branching sentences, or other kinds of ways to vary our sentence structure can really help maintain interest and flow of our essay. Finally, we know, probably a lot of us hate this step, but making sure that we reread and revise our response is absolutely key. We want to save some time for that because we're going to make some mistakes. We're going to make some typos, right? Maybe we're going to, mess up some structures. That's going to happen. That's okay. We just want to make sure that at the end of the passage that we take a moment to revise, to proofread, to make sure we get rid of as many of those as we possibly can. All right, so a lot of good guidelines here set for us to attack the extended response section. All right, so now let's turn our attention to like the core exercise with this extended response section. Like, what is the main thing we have to do? Well, the main thing we have to do is to evaluate and identify which writer's argument is stronger, and to detail how the supporting evidence that author provides really supports his or her argument. That's the core task here. It's extremely important that we understand that that's our goal here. Like I said, let's make sure we understand the component pieces of an argument that we are going to see in these passages. We know that the argument must include a claim. It's just the point, right? Whatever the author's, why the author's writing that, like what the point is of the author's statement, that's what we care about. We also know that author needs to provide logic and reasoning and key pieces of evidence that help bolster that claim. We want to find that. We're going to practice a little bit here before we get into the actual task and looking at some passages. We'll make sure we can identify evidence that supports a claim. An author might also have assumptions that underlie the use of that evidence to reach this conclusion, right? It's just, an assumption is just sort of like the missing piece that makes an argument logical. It's not stated, but it's there. It's kind of hidden behind the evidence and the conclusion. Mainly, though, we're going to focus on claim and evidence because that's absolutely huge for our ability to analyze and evaluate these passages. All right. So remember, they are going to provide the prompt. They are going to provide the task. We definitely want to make sure that we quickly define that without forcing ourselves to reread all the text that we know already that we're going to see, right? We want to have the basics of the prompt memorized. Just make sure you glance at it and understand what is going to be the goal of this particular extended response section. So in this case, with our co-writing prompt here, quickly look and it says, okay, passage A proposes clean coal. Passage B identifies drawbacks to this position. So right away, we see the two stances, the two claims that we are going to witness in those prompts. So good, we're off to a good start. Now the rest of this stuff is going to be boilerplate. It's going to be standard material that we see all the time. Analyze both selections. Got it, we know we're going to do that. Determine the position you like better. Got it, we know what to do there. Use relevant and specific, aka examples and evidence from the passages to support your claim as to why you think which passage is better. Of course, we know we need to type our response in the box, and we're going to have 45 minutes. But the three, the last 3 bullet points there, we are going to know that stuff intimately. So really we're just going to check that first part of the prompt to see, hey, what are the specifics of this particular section? That's it. Okay? Just identify what the writing assignment is about. We know in this case it's about 2 positions of clean coal. Then we make sure that we understand the following, of course, that we're going to support the core passage that we like better. And of course, then we need to make sure that we understand that we need to provide specific and relevant information. Support your position. That's absolutely clutch. Okay, so now that we know what our goal is, what the task is, we need to have a process. We need to have a method, something we can always lean on and rely on as we approach this material. All right, so step 1, we are going to definitely make sure that we analyze passage 1 first. And we are going to say, hey, what's this author's claim? And how well does this author support that claim? Which means we want to identify both strong and weak evidence. Because if we end up supporting the other side, we want to have something we could say about passage 1 that's like, hey, this is very weak evidence. This is why, why the author of passage 1 shouldn't be supported here, right? But if you're going to argue that the author of passage 1 makes the stronger point, then we definitely want to make sure that we identify the strong evidence that that author provides. All right, so once we do that for passage 1, we're literally going to do the exact same thing for passage 2. Of course, as we're reading passage 2, we should be really intent on thinking about, hey, does passage 2 have more strong evidence than passage 1? Does passage 2 have, weaker evidence than passage 1? Because those are the things that will help in your consideration of which passage you are going to support. All right, so once you've made that decision, step 3, that is where you develop your own argument. That's the goal, that's the task. Now, when I say develop, that doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to be actually typing up that argument quite yet. Step 3 is your outlining step, right? This is the one where you think about, you decide which position you feel is better supported, but then you use your noteboard to identify sort of the key points that you're going to make in support of that position. You also might want to think about the passage you're not selecting and think about what are some key elements of that passage that might be reasons why you wouldn't support that one. Okay? All right, step 4, once you have your outline, once you have your plan, I promise you, once you get to step 4, all of the hard work is done. Once you do the outlining, then all you have to do is type your response. Okay? But once you get to that step, all of the hard work is done. At that point, all you have to do is just make sure that you state what you've already identified and that you make sure you're well organized, right? That you have an introduction and a conclusion, that you have discrete body paragraphs that address a particular idea, okay? You get to spend most of your time here, but don't give the outlining step short shrift, because if you do that effectively, you will spend less time, you will be less worried and harried when you are actually typing up your response. So spend your time with that outlining and development step. Now we know that there's an extra step here, that we can't just type it and be done. We need to make sure that we save time to proofread. We know how important that is to fix grammatical errors. It is something that we are scored on, so we want to make sure that we minimize our spelling and grammatical errors. It's okay if we have a couple typos. That's not going to totally destroy our score, right? Because we know that they're mainly focused on how well we argue and organize and develop. But if we can fix grammatical errors, we definitely want to do that. Okay, so we know with step 1, we're going to read and analyze passage 1. Let's explore that step 1 in action here. Okay, so what I want to do is take a look here at sort of a passage in a second, and we're going to focus on, doing all the things that we just talked about when it comes to passage 1. All right, so that means we want to make sure that we can spot the author's claim and that we can identify strong and weak evidence. One caveat before we get into doing this is don't make it all about how you feel about the actual position, right? It's not like, in that example we looked at clean coal. So your goal here is not to say, well, I totally disagree with clean coal because of this, 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 and this reason. That's not the idea. The idea is for you to look at that author's position on clean coal and to decide how well you think that author supports his or her position. Okay? So it's not about your own position. Very important that we understand that before we do any kind of practice. Something that I definitely want you to pay attention to as well is how well the argument makes sense. This is where we can sort of use, our street skills, our street smarts, so to speak, right? If the argument seems, airy, if it seems like it's not very supported, if it seems like it's resting on, unsteady ground, it's good that you identify that. That will help you decide which argument you are going to support. Okay, so you can lean on those skills, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about what makes evidence strong versus what makes evidence weak before we practice with the passage. Well, strong evidence is going to include research, especially research by a credible organization or source. Okay, probably it will be done by experts, or the evidence will cite an expert in that field. Okay, reliable sources that are indicated, declared, way better than nameless sources or sources that we're not sure about. I mean, who are they, right? In other words, we want the sources to be reliable. We've probably heard that in the news at some point in our lives, right? That like an unnamed source or sources inside whatever, right? Sources inside the organization say. Well, it's always better if those sources are reliable and named. We can trust it a little bit more, okay? Of course, the facts are extremely important. We also want to make sure that author is reaching logical conclusions. Right? If the author seems to be coming up with some crazy ideas based on the evidence, the facts that we see, then maybe we're like, yeah, I don't know if that necessarily supports that idea. Maybe I'm not going to say that this author has the better position. Okay, so how can evidence be weak sauce? Well, what if it makes vague references, right? References that aren't indicated that they're credible or experts or a reliable source. Of course, if we don't name sources, that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to say, hey, we think that this is going to be a great source of information. If we don't know it, it's a little bit ambiguous for us. Of course, if the author provides a bunch of details that don't have any pertinence for the argument, that's not good. That doesn't help his or her position. Of course, committing flawed reasoning, classic flaws, we want to spot those too. Right? We want our argument to be sound and logical and well supported. Okay, we want to do the same thing with passage 2. Of course, we know that step 2 is the same idea. We can use our noteboard to outline, to say like, hey, author of passage 1 says this, author of passage 2 says this. Let me write down evidence that's strong and weak for both. Right? Let's just have a table that's set up with all that information. Definitely a good practice. Not just for your outline ultimately for what you are going to say, but also outline the author's arguments of the two passages. It will help you with the next step, I promise. Okay, remember, don't rush through these steps. They are very, very important. Let's hit this reminder here. We're tested on our ability to analyze the arguments presented. If we don't spend time reading and analyzing, we are not going to be able to form a really powerful, cogent essay. Okay. Outlining step 3. We know how crucial this is. I've tried to emphasize this a lot. Remember to put your information in a logical order. We'll talk about what that order will be here in a second. But a good idea is to prioritize your strongest pieces of evidence. Prioritize that. It will help you, I promise, to sort of grab the reader's attention. Once they see that strong point that you're making in that first paragraph, they're going to be like, okay, everything else from here I already know is going to be good, right? Because they've started so well. All right, so we'll learn more about this order though here in a second. Okay, so a great way to earn points. We always care about this, right? How do we earn points? We want to have 2 or 3 main ideas. They're going to be, the sort of focus of our body paragraphs. Identify those early. Identify those in your outlining step, or sorry, in your breakdown step, and then really, circle them or zero in on them on your outlining step. Make sure you have those 2 or 3 main points ready to go. Now, of course, how you develop those main ideas, is important, and we need to make sure that we, provide a full explanation, which means sentences, which means reasoning, which means, making sure our thought process is very clear and continuous. If you do not build upon your ideas, you may not score highly. So pay attention. Don't just move on once you feel like you've hit your point. Make sure you fully develop why that's so helpful for that author's position. Okay, so here's one potential map. It's not how I would necessarily do it. I can talk to you a little bit more so about how I would outline, but it's one possible way that you can sort of visualize your thoughts, right? Sort of putting that thesis statement central, right? Like what is going to be, the claim, right, that the author is making. You could also do this for your own response, right? Which is, okay, hey, what's my thesis going to be? And what are the 3 core reasons that I'm going to provide? And then how can I support those reasons? We also could say like, hey, what's a potential counter argument that we need to address? Or what's something that maybe we could look at faulty reasoning for the other side that we can include? Totally fine. Usually my outlines are a little bit more linear, right? So they're more like, okay, thesis in paragraph 1. What's going to be my focus of paragraph 2? What's my core reason? What's an example I could provide? Move on. Down to paragraph 2 then. What's going to be, my core reason that I'm going to discuss in paragraph 2? Same thing with paragraph 3. And then I think, okay, well, if I'm going to include another paragraph before my conclusion, it's going to be sort of detailing, where the author of the other argument goes wrong, right? Maybe even addressing a potential, like, positive aspect of the argument you didn't choose, but then showing how it really is flawed or faulty and how it doesn't really help that other side, okay? That can help establish credibility, to use a fancy rhetorical word, ethos, and it can help your argument extensively. So you don't have to outline just like this. We just wanted to give you a couple different options so that you had something you could sort of lean on and say, okay, this is how I like to outline and prepare for writing my essay. Okay, just one way you could do it. All right, so of course, we know that we need to think about our introduction. And the introduction, it's going to seem like there's a lot going on there, but there's really only a couple moves that we need to make. Okay? The first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we summarize, right, the author's position on the topic. Right? So we need to make sure we come out and say, while author A says this, author B says this related to clean coal or whatever the topic might be. Okay? Now, you then want to, once you state that, once you give a quick summary of what their claims are, you could include a little bit, maybe a sort of broad look on what type of evidence they provide, but you don't have to get too extensive with that. But basically, once you do that summary, all you have to do then is turn to your thesis, which is, hey, while the author of passage A provides this for support, the author of passage B provides much more credible information and better logic that supports his or her argument. Make sure it's very clear which side you are going to take before you move on from your introduction. Okay? All right, so of course, in your thesis statement, you absolutely need to pick a side. Declare which position is better supported. Absolutely. It needs to be clear. It needs to provide insight into what you're going to discuss. A couple ways that you could do this. Now, I'm absolutely going to advocate for the second one, just because any time that we can sort of cut out personal reference, we want to. Now, it's not to say that the first thesis there is necessarily going to cost you points. I'd rather have you be clear than be unclear just because you're trying to avoid saying I, right? Clarity is always more important. It's always the most important thing. So you could say, hey, as your thesis, I think passage A is better because it provides this type of evidence, or because it explains how this evidence relates to the topic, whatever it might be. Fine. Now, if you look at the second part here, I like this a little bit better. Passage A makes a stronger argument because it backs up its conclusion with facts about this, this, this. That's stronger. You never had to make a personal reference. You never had to say I, and yet it's still very clear which side you think is better supported. Okay? So two possibilities here. Definitely, if you can, lean towards the latter. All right. Okay, so once you have that thesis statement, once you have that introduction, then you have to really look closely at the evidence. The evidence, the strongest pieces of evidence, are going to be the main ideas in your body paragraphs. So it's absolutely crucial that you spot those. Okay? So there's going to be lots of evidence, but if you can identify the three core pieces, that's going to be really, really clutch. If you're having trouble, at least two. At least two. Okay? And if you're having that much trouble, you might think about switching to the other side, because maybe there's more evidence over there. Even if you didn't think at first that you liked that position, maybe it would make your essay easier, because you could just say, oh, okay, well, I know that those are going to be my bullet points here for my essay. Okay, so one of the things I absolutely love is having like ready-made sentence structures. There's actually a really good book I'll reference here called They Say, I Say, Moves for Disagreeing. It's great. It's chock full of these types of examples here at the bottom of the page, where it just kind of gives us templates, ways that we can address comments, claims, evidence, and riff on that, right? And provide our own opinions on those ideas. So here's just some examples. The passage stated this, which supports this idea, or in the text, the author states, which it provides support for, or one example of this, right? I mean, all these kinds of structures can really help us just sort of have an easy time taking our outline and putting it into text. Okay, so take a look at those. If you spot They Say, I Say, maybe on Amazon for cheap, maybe take a look there. I think they provide a couple templates online too, but things that can really help our writing, improve our writing. Okay, once we have our outline, then we have to write. And we know that we're giving ourselves about 20-25 minutes to do this. We know the outline step is far and away the most important, but we definitely want to make sure that we get time to fully develop our ideas. We don't want to spend so much time outlining that we can't write anything. Okay? So in terms of our writing, we definitely want to make sure that we include the thesis in the introduction. We don't want to wait on that. That has to come out early. Okay? All right, so then we want to make sure that we have a body paragraph for each of our main ideas, a topic sentence and a main idea per paragraph. Okay? Definitely want to make sure that we always use evidence from the text to support our position. Whatever our claim is in a paragraph, it must be supported with evidence. You should not ever have a claim that you are making that lacks support, that lacks evidence or logic from you. Right? Make sure that you provide support always, no matter what claim you make. Okay? Definitely want to make sure too, to get full points, that we include a conclusion. All right, so we'll talk about the different structures here, but usually intro, at least 2 paragraphs in support of your chosen side, maybe 3 if you can get it done. Maybe including another paragraph, kind of a flex paragraph, that addresses the flaws or faulty reasoning in the other side. Could be a next paragraph, and then make sure you have a conclusion. Okay, so we definitely would sacrifice that like bonus support paragraph or the paragraph that addresses the other side before we'll sacrifice the conclusion, because we won't get full points unless we have that strong organization. Okay, all right, so remember to include specific evidence. I cannot stress that word specific enough. We don't want our evidence to be ambiguous or vague. We want to pluck out very specific evidence from the passage. But remember, we don't just stop there. We're not done if we just say, hey, this is what it says. We always have to explain how or why that evidence supports that the position you're defending is better. Okay? So remember to explain. And one reason we don't want to just simply pluck out large chunks of text is that we could get a score of 0 because we never actually provide our own writing and our own logic. So use your evidence and your citations strategically, but don't overdo it. Okay? All right. So quoting the passage helps if you explain. You're going to be sick of that word by the time we're done, right? Okay, I got it. I've got to explain. If you're still wondering what that means to explain, you'll see when we actually get into the passages here in a second. But don't simply lift and restate material from the passages, right? Don't do that. Here's some classic mistakes we want to avoid. So one way that people tend to sort of mess up is that they say which position they agree with, but then just say why they agree with it, and never address how well the author has supported his or her position. Remember, it's not about you, right? It's about how well that person has constructed an argument, okay? Here's another way people tend to mess up, is that they say, I think this argument is better, but then just provide a summary of the two sides, right? Remember, a summary is not enough. You have to provide evidence and explain how that evidence makes that argument better. Okay, you can't just say what they say. You have to explain how or why it works so effectively. Okay, so now that we've had a chance to sort of think about these steps and what are the different tasks that we need to accomplish with each of these steps, I want to make sure that we practice identifying claims and evidence in an author's argument, right? Because that's absolutely crucial, something we absolutely have to do with both passages that we're going to read for the extended response section. So go ahead, take a look at the author's claim here, and then go ahead and read the paragraph that follows. As you do, I want you to see if you can't pluck out the evidence that the author has used. And I want you to go a step further. I want you to think, is this powerful evidence? Is this weak evidence? How could I argue in favor of this or against this? Think about all that stuff, and then once you finish reading, you can start the recording back up. You can always pause it. Start it back up when you're ready to discuss. Go ahead. Okay, let's see what you came up with. All right, so the claim here is that we don't have family time, right? We don't get any family time. All right, we got a grumpy Gus here, maybe a dad, mom upset that hey, we don't get this quality time with the fam. All right, so let's see what evidence you were able to pluck out of the paragraph that supports this idea. Well, the first thing is that people get home at different times. It's kind of hard to hang out if everyone's arriving at different points of the day, right? If we kept reading, hopefully we spotted that hey, people do different things once they finally get here too. Someone's working on homework. We got a diligent student. We got someone on the internet, hopefully maybe doing something for school, right? Or work. And then we've got somebody who's just texting away. Kind of hard for that to be productive, but we got people doing different things, right? All over the place here. Nobody's sort of interacting together. Seems like it's pretty solid evidence for the claim. If we kept reading, hopefully we saw hey, not only do people do different things at the home, right? But when they're not home, they're in clubs or societies, or they've got work things that they have to do. So that prevents them from sort of hanging out as well, even when they try specifically to do something fun as a family. Okay, so we get a lot of good evidence here. This is all very pertinent, very relevant to that claim, right? I mean, it's a little bit different from a standard passage in that we don't really have to worry about the source material, right? We don't have questioning that. But hopefully we spotted that all of this stuff supports the author's claim. And then, for the passage, for the task that comes next, in support of this argument, we would say, okay, the author of passage A provides a better argument because that author provides clear indications that when the family's at home, they're not hanging out, and when they try to go out and do something fun as a group, they can never bring everybody together, right? Something like that, like a way to explain how those facts relate back to that author's central claim. But again, the exercise here is just making sure we see how evidence relates back to a claim. That's all we wanted to do. All right, step 5. We know that step 5 is proofreading our response. And you don't have to just look for spelling and grammatical errors. You can check your organization. You could say, hey, did I provide a strong thesis statement in my introduction? Did I have a clear topic sentence that had a claim in each body paragraph, and did I support that claim every time with evidence, with logic? Did I do that? Make sure. Then make sure that you have a clear flow of ideas. Does this essay flow the way I want it to? Do I want to move this paragraph up here, move this one down here? Do I use transitions enough, right, to link up ideas? Pay attention to that sort of stylistic and organizational aspect of your essay as well, not just the grammar and spelling errors. Of course, if there's anything you could omit because it's kind of fluff, or it's long, it's a run-on sentence, or it's long-winded, or whatever, right? Make sure that you pluck it out if you need to. We don't have to just add. We can take away too. Could you conversely, maybe fuse two sentences that don't need to be split up because they state something that's related? That can be very helpful too. Okay. Of course, word choice, we know how important that is. If there's a word that you feel like, oh, you know what, that's a better word because it's more specific, it's clear, or because it's just a more interesting word for that context, that's important too. The interest of the reader is an important part of this process. Okay. Of course, you want to make sure your concluding paragraph accomplishes a couple things. For the most part, you want to make sure that you recapitulate your central idea, that you restate, that you reinforce your core thesis. Okay. So make sure that we accomplish that. All right, so what are some things that we can check for as we're doing step 5 to make sure that we're getting maximum points? A lot of the stuff we've talked about, but I'm going to run through them really quickly. Vary that sentence structure. We know that's important. Make sure our sentences are coordinated properly, right? Proper punctuation between clauses. Of course, we want to avoid redundancy and wordiness. Right? We don't want to just sound elevated if we're just doing a big word dump, right? Awkward phrasing, maybe we've seen that on a paper that we've written before. I know that's a very vague thing to say, avoid awkwardness. So maybe I'll give you a little bit more of a clear idea of what I mean by that. So by avoiding awkwardness, a great way to do that is just to sort of maintain active voice. And the easiest way to maintain active voice is to sort of to put the person doing the action before the action itself. It's not the only way, but it's the easiest way, right? So instead of the bone was chewed on by the dog, right? The dog chewed on the bone. You see the difference, right? The latter one is far more active. It puts the actor, the dog, before the verb chewed. That can help you avoid awkward phrasing if you can sort of learn to do that, okay? But we do want to vary our sentence structure, so maybe we don't do it all the time. We know how important transitions are. We've heard that a couple times now. We've got that. We mentioned avoiding run-on sentences and avoiding fragments as well. We know that's absolutely clutch too. One thing is to sort of have your classic homophones memorized. So, to, or their, possessive, or they are, right? It's and it's possessive versus, it is. All those sort of classic opportunities for sort of misusing the proper grammar. It's a good opportunity to review what word choice would be appropriate for a particular situation. Subject-verb agreement, always important, right? Singular verbs get singular subjects, right? Same thing with your pronoun. You want to make sure you have pronoun antecedent agreement. So whatever your pronoun is referring to, right? Only use they or their for plural, right? For a plural antecedent, never use it for a singular one, and vice versa, right? If we have a singular antecedent, we would use he, she, or it, right? Definitely want to make sure that our word choice and word order is in play. It kind of fits with awkwardness a little bit. Capitalize when you need to. Use apostrophes for possessiveness, and of course we want to make sure that we, whenever possible, right, as much as we can, if we have 1 or 2 punctuation errors, that's okay, that we punctuate correctly. We could have a full lesson on all of this stuff, and in fact we do. So you should check out the language conventions and usage session to review all of these skills. But we could have even an entire lesson on just punctuation. At least I know I could talk about punctuation for a long time. I'm not going to bore you with all those punctuation rules now, but you might want to check on how to combine two independent clauses appropriately. How to use certain punctuation around quotation marks since you're going to be citing sources. Those are some things I would definitely make sure that you look up if you're not quite sure how to do that. Okay, but check out that session because a lot of great tips in that session too about all this good stuff here. Okay, now we get to the real deal. This slide's just up here to remind you of the steps. We're going to analyze the two passages. We're going to point out weak and strong evidence. We're going to decide which option we're going to argue for. We're going to pick our key points, think about how we would organize this essay, and then of course we're gonna type up our response and see how we could write a really strong, effective response to these passages. We're finally there. Let's do it. Don't forget to proofread after you finish. This is just a quick rundown of those steps that we looked at in depth just a second ago. Okay, so we know that off to the right, we're going to get sort of our standard text, right? All the information we know we're already going to see. Hey, analyze these arguments. Develop an argument where you decide which is better. Incorporate relevant and specific evidence, right? It's going to take 45 minutes. It doesn't have to be the one that you necessarily agree with. All that stuff you have heard me say already 3 or 4 times in this lesson. Have that memorized. Know that that is what they are going to ask you before you ever get to the extended response section. Okay, so passage 1. I'm not going to just skip down to the text. I kind of want to glance at the stuff above that. I want to learn who's the speaker here. Who are they speaking to, right? That might help me big time in terms of my evaluation of the passage that follows. Well, what is this? This is a press release. We're hearing from a congresswoman, Melody Walls here, House of Representatives. Okay, so it's just a press release, right? So that's our audience is, anybody who would read a press release. So kind of a broad audience here. It's not like she's just speaking before the House, right? It goes out broadly. All right, so we know who's speaking. We know, what the vector is for that message. Now let's get into the message itself. Remember, as we read, I want you thinking about, number 1, what's her stance? Number 2, what evidence does she provide to support that? Even in her announcement here, right, the economic boost, I'm thinking, okay, it seems like she's going to be in favor of something, even before we get to that paragraph. So let's just read the first part of this together, and then as we move on to the next couple paragraphs, I'm going to have you read on your own and pluck out some key information. So here we go. Representative Melody Walls announced that Congress passed the Highway and Transit Bill today. Okay, so far I don't know what her stance is. Go ahead and read the first paragraph. So just read till you get to here, till you get to construction. Stop where you see that orange box. Take a second to read it, pause the recording, and then we'll see if after this paragraph, if we know maybe what the topic is a little bit more, if we know what her position is, or if we get some evidence that supports her position. Go ahead, take a look at that paragraph. When you're ready to talk about it with me, start the recording back up. Okay, let's see what you uncovered here in this paragraph. Well, right away, we get this claim here that the expansion of Highway 17 from 2 to 4 lanes will positively affect the town of Oak Falls. So that is our Representative Walls. That is her claim. This will have a positive effect on the town. Okay. Let's see if we got any evidence that supports that claim. Well, we learned that it will be moved 2 miles east. I'm not quite sure if that's evidence by itself, but what follows is definitely good support, right? That this will ease traffic congestion and create job opportunities. Both of those things definitely seem like, if they're true, that would be really positive effects on this town. Right, so right away we're probably thinking, hey, maybe I've got a couple pieces of evidence that if I were to argue for this side, that I would cite, right? That it ease traffic, create jobs. Seems like 2 good potential pieces of evidence in support of this. Okay, let's read the next part of the passage together because it kind of spans the 2 slides, and we'll see if we get even more evidence. Last year, Representative Walz held town hall meetings to gather opinions from her constituents about revitalizing the economy in the 12th district. Well, that's a fact, right? We did learn that she was able to gather opinions. So, if she got maybe good feedback, maybe this could help her her claim. Let's see. 2 years ago, Turnaround Motors and Bell Camera closed their factory doors. Okay, so we had some people go out of business. That might be, if we link that especially to the fact that this could create job opportunities, maybe those two facts together could be really powerful support for this, for Representative Walz's position. Let's see. All right, let's look at the next part here. The result has been high unemployment and no prospects for new businesses. We got unemployment, no new businesses. Well, again, that might be a reason why we want to bring businesses here. Then we learned that Representative Walz heard their concerns for jobs in the district. Okay. Go ahead and read that next paragraph. Pause the recording and see if you get more evidence, if you get another claim. Let's see if it's strong or if it's weak. Evaluate it. When you're ready to review with me, start it back up. Okay, let's see what you uncovered. Right away, another really big piece of evidence that we could tie to the two we've already mentioned about jobs, right? Highway means jobs for local workers. Okay, that could be a really strong piece of evidence, right? Let's keep reading. Once completed, it will bring more long-distance travelers. Okay, maybe that's support for revitalizing the area, we think. Some officials. Ooh, this is an interesting. Some officials anticipate. Well, who? Who are these officials? Are they experts? Are they, have they been chosen to be an official for any particular skill that they have? I don't know. So some people anticipate 30% increase in traffic. Okay, well, that's an interesting bit of evidence. I could see that supporting or potentially weakening the claim here, depending on whether or not that traffic comes into the city or doesn't, right? So also I'm like, I guess it could be credible. At least they are officials and they're not just random Joes off the street, right? But still, I'd like a little bit more to know about the credibility of these officials. Well, they say in the next line that an increase in traffic will attract national motel and restaurant chains. So that could be more jobs too, right? If it happens. Notice she says it will attract. Okay, it seems like a prediction. Maybe it's speculation. I'd like to hear more factual evidence to support it. Let's keep reading. Go ahead and read the rest of the text on this screen, and then we'll talk about what you're seeing here. Okay, let's see how you would evaluate the evidence that we get on this page. Well, we learned, if those businesses come, it means permanent jobs. Now, there's no guarantee that those come, but obviously permanent jobs really ties back into one of Walz's central claim about the positive effect of this change. Okay, we also get then in the next paragraph another, sort of potential positive benefit, right? Which is, hey, we could have tourist attractions, which means, more business for our local shops and restaurants. All that stuff could be, again, positive effects if they happen. We don't want to assume, like the author is, that it necessarily will happen. What we want to see is, does she provide sufficient evidence to suggest that it likely will? All right, we get another sort of angle in the last paragraph here on this page, which is not necessarily like benefit in terms of jobs and money and businesses, but just in terms of like noise pollution, right? That we could cut down on traffic congestion and noise. Now look what happens here. At the end of this paragraph, we get a 2001 study. Okay, so I'm like, okay, now we're getting a little bit more, if it's a credible study, it's better though. Saying we have a study, that's better support than just speculating that this will reduce traffic congestion and noise. Providing any kind of a study is always going to be a bigger, better support, okay? Now, the more qualifiers they give you for the study, even better. Okay, so let's see what this study says. So the 2001 study in Texas showed that bypasses reduce traffic through towns. There's a little bit of text down there at the bottom of the slide. That's pretty good support, right? Anytime we have a study, we're like, I'm going to put that under the strong evidence column of my outline. All right, so it would increase traffic in towns by as much as 75%. That's a really specific figure. That's good too. Let's just finish up this paragraph together. We also learned that we would reduce road maintenance costs. That's a benefit to the town. Okay, so look how the whole passage finishes though. We get sort of a recapitulation of the central thesis, which is that, hey, these federal funds is an important investment in this area. That, hey, this is going to be a good thing for Oak Falls, or whatever their little town is called here. All right. So now that we've had a chance to look at passage 1, and we've thought about what that person's claim is and what evidence she provides to support it, right? We say, all right, I've got a sense of, I think that these pieces of evidence were pretty good. These were a little bit, maybe not quite as great support as we're looking for here. But once we have that, we're like, all right, it's not just about passage 1. I got to think about passage 2 next as well. And remember, as we read passage 2, I definitely want you thinking very closely about which side you would end up taking. Go ahead and read that first paragraph. And let me know when you think you found the author's position. And of course, whether or not you think you found good evidence or weak evidence that the author provides to support that. Go ahead and take a look at the first paragraph. Pause the recording to read and start it back up when you're ready to talk about it. Okay, let's see what you found. All right, so first we learn a little bit about the speaker, right? We always want to pay attention to that rhetorical triangle, right? Sorry, it's not a triangle. How do I do my, I do a cool triangle here with my fingers. There, got it like that, right? Who's the speaker? What's the message? And what's the audience? Okay, so it's a letter to the editor. We get that early on. Then we learn that this person's a small business owner in that district. So small business owner in that district. Okay, so we learned that Walls had town halls, right, had meetings there, but this person lives there. That might give them a little bit more credibility, right? We always talk about that, right? Like that politicians potentially get to be too embroiled or infected by Washington, by being away from their own districts, right? So maybe it's something we could use here if we're going to support passage 2. Okay, so then we just get a little bit of some brief details about the bill, including the plans to move it, which we already know. But then we get the claim at the end. I find this unacceptable. Okay, so Wall says this is beneficial to the town. Our business owner here says this is unacceptable. We should not do this. All right, now let's see what evidence this author provides to support that this is an unacceptable stance to sort of change this highway. If we look at just the first little bit of text here, we'll read that together. We learn that, okay, because it runs through states, construction will be paid with federal funds. All right, let's finish this paragraph together. That means that some of the people who live in the area, some of their federal taxes will pay for a potentially harmful road for the town. Okay. All right, so we got this idea of like, not only are we not going to be spending money for the right thing that could help our town, but we're going to be kind of wasting money on something that will actually harm the town. It's kind of, I would say right now that's fairly weak evidence. No support, nothing like that. But it's still, it's logic, it's reasoning, right? Okay. Next thing we also get is another belief, right? Which is, we get a couple beliefs here right in a row here. But the belief is that the people from Oak Falls won't use the road. Now, it's a belief, it's not a fact. But you could say that, hey, this person lives in the town. Maybe this person knows a little bit more about these people than does the Representative Walls. All right, so then if the people in the town aren't using it, it says that the town and district will lose money as a result of this change. Again, a lot of these are claims. This one's a pretty big claim here. I want to find evidence. Why does the author believe that they're going to lose money here? Well, go ahead and read that next paragraph on your own and see if you can't find some solid evidence that might support this author's stance. What do you see? Okay, let's see what you uncovered here in this next paragraph on the slide. Well, first we learned that the jobs would be temporary. The construction jobs in particular. Now, if they have lost their jobs that were permanent, that were manufacturing jobs, temporary jobs might help in the short term, but not in the long term. Okay? Our author then goes on to say that, hey, once the road construction is finished, we'll only have minimum wage jobs, maybe at the new hotels that come in. If they do, maybe not. Okay, so we get some evidence here, right? We get some reasoning, some logic here about the about whether or not this will actually produce the jobs that Walls claims. So maybe we list some of this as evidence. Let's keep going. Go ahead and read this big paragraph here on this slide as well. Again, look for evidence. Evaluate on your own whether or not you think it's strong or weak evidence and why. When you're ready to talk about it, start the recording back up. Okay, let's see what you uncovered. All right, so first we learned that the highway will bypass 4 cities. Well, if our goal is to bring more people into the city, bypassing the cities is probably not a good idea. Well, our author goes on to support that position, right? It said, hey, if we have fewer travelers that, eat, sleep, stay, we're going to lose business, not gain it, right? Like, this isn't going to increase traffic to our town. It's going to increase people going right by us, right? Then our author goes on to sort of deal with Representative Wall's claims here, that there's no guarantee that they'll come into town. It may happen, but it may not. And Representative Walls hasn't necessarily said that there's anything in particular that guarantees that they will come into town. Now, it's the next sort of bomb that the author drops here that's so powerful. The author actually deals with the study that Representative Walls referenced. And the author says, hey, it did show this, that it reduces traffic and noise in towns. But, look at that transition keyword, that same study also shows that they have a negative impact on local businesses, which is like the most important thing here, which is a big part of her claims. This is going to help the area, right? So I think these people would say, look, like, we'd rather take the business over the noise of the trucks or the traffic coming through, right? Like, losing your business is a big, big problem. All right, so that's a very powerful turn there. I would definitely say that that's probably the strongest piece of evidence that the author here provides. And it's great because it's already a piece of evidence that you could use to say, hey, here's what's flawed about Representative Walls' argument, whereas here's why the second person argues something a little bit stronger. All right? So if that's what you decide to do, if you decide to argue for passage 2. Let's keep reading. If this project were paid for with state tax money, it was going to be paid with, or right now the proposal is to pay for it with federal funds, which is different, right? So if it were going to be paid by state funds alone, this person believes that voters would have struck it down, that the state would have said, no, we're not going to do that. It doesn't help us. But it seems like our author here is kind of creating a schism between federal and state, which could be a powerful rhetorical technique. It seems like speculation, though. So in terms of our levels of evidence, I'm not quite sure it's as strong as the study. Let's look at the next bit, though. The next bit is pretty strong evidence here, is that Representative Walls held town hall meetings to hear their opinions, but obviously she did not listen. So she kind of says, look, I came to town meetings, and after town meetings, this is what I propose. But what she never says is whether or not the people in the town meetings agreed with her or disagreed with her, right? So it seems like this person here is saying, like, hey, in the town halls, we voiced concern, not support. All right. Okay, so once you've read the 2 passages and you've evaluated them in terms of how strong and how weak the evidence is that they provide to support their position, you have to take a side. So just think to yourself, there's no wrong or right answer here. Which side would you argue? Think about it. We are actually going to write a response, or I'm going to show you what a perfect response would be that supports the second position. Okay? But I'm going to really walk through this template, this essay, to show you how you should construct your essay. Right? What are the moves that you should be making in your paragraphs? Now, obviously, before you ever get to this point, you need to have your outline. Okay? So, of course, in your outline for the introduction, even before we look at what the actual text says, you'd want to have a summary of the 2 sides. Right? Walls says it's beneficial. The author says it's not. Okay? Then you want to have your thesis prepared, which is, hey, the the letter to the editor is a stronger argument. It has better evidence. Then you want to have your body paragraphs already laid out, right? You want to have the topic sentences. Okay, so the first thing that they start out with here is the federal tax dollars, right? Maybe that was their bullet point number 1. That wouldn't be where I would necessarily begin. I think I would begin with probably not the study either, because that's a good transition point. So maybe I would start with the highway being bypassed, like bypassing the cities, and that they may not come into town, right? But that's okay. We could potentially differ depending on how we would structure our essay in terms of what's the strongest point. But here we start with federal tax dollars. In a second, we'll talk about how we support that idea. I just want you to look at the topic sentence for this paragraph too before we go back. So the next bit is the construction jobs as temporary. That's very strong. I probably would have switched those 2 paragraphs, right? But I just want you to see that, hey, we've got a strong topic sentence there for each of those body paragraphs. In our outline, we would have jotted those facts down, right? Those would have been like where we began those paragraphs, okay? All right, so of course, right, one of our body paragraphs was absolutely going to be that 2001 study, right? We knew that was probably our single strongest piece of evidence to support that position. So you see, though, how our outline, right, hitting those 3 things immediately translates into our topic sentences for those body paragraphs, okay? Then, of course, we end with the conclusion down here, which is a different structure. All right, so I just wanted to talk to you about how the outline gets translated into text. But now I want to talk about the specific moves that the author makes in the intro and body paragraphs here, so we see how the author here really supports using evidence from the text. Okay, so remember, in our introduction, the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we summarize the 2 positions. Okay, so we talk about the press release and the letter, the fact that they both provide speculation and some fact to support it, very general. Then we want to make sure we summarize their individual positions. The press release, is in support of expansion, whereas the letter says that this is unacceptable and it could prove harmful even for our district. So we summarize the situation, we make sure we clearly state what the 2 stances are, and then our thesis statement is always, what position are you going to support? So, another great use of a contrast keyword here, and you see that the author of this passage says, while both sides make an acceptable case, the latter provides a stronger argument, right? The letter to the editor provides a stronger argument. It's very clear what this author's thesis is, and that is essential for a thesis statement. Totally essential. Okay, now if you think about that transition, we could transition a couple different ways. Right? We could say, while the author of passage 1, in this case, while Representative Walz, uses some facts to marshal to her position, right? The latter provides stronger evidence and thus is a better supportive position. You can use that transition in a couple different ways, either by sort of looking at the other side or by sort of broadly saying that both make decent arguments. It's a very balanced statement, right? Very strong ethos, strong credibility here. It's not totally one-sided, which is a good thing. That's going to help your writing. All right, so that's our introduction. Now we know that when we turn to our body paragraph, we want to do a couple things with that first sentence. We want to transition, and we want to make sure that in that topic sentence we clearly state the core idea, the big piece of evidence that we're going to address. Okay? So maybe I would start this paragraph, if I were going to make it a little adjustment would be like, hey, first and foremost, the letter provides an explanation of how federal tax dollars are influencing Representative Walz's decision here, right? So it's just one other way to potentially manipulate that text a little bit, okay? But one example is fine too. It's a little bit passive, this sentence, right? One example is the explanation. So that's what I'm saying is a little bit of a touch of a revision could even tighten up what's a perfect scoring essay, right? We can always make improvements. Even with a perfect score, our writing can be better. Okay, now remember, once we introduce the core idea, right? The core piece of evidence we're going to address, we need to explain how it supports the position. We do that here in this next sentence. This proves, that's a little bit strong language, but it's still good. It's still getting us to where we want to be. You could also say this supports, right? This proves with factual information, so facts, that's not disputed, right? Federal tax dollars are going to pay for this, that the district did not have a fair say in the bill. Okay, well, that was a claim that this author made at the end, right? So we're getting to explaining now how that evidence supports that author's claim. The notion that few residents will use the road that their tax dollars are providing is an opinion. Okay, so now the author of this statement is saying, I get the difference between fact and speculation, right? But this is a great move to make. It's kind of saying, like, I see a potential flaw with this, but now I'm going to show you how it doesn't really undermine this author's position. Great move, great rhetorical move to make. So we kind of concede, yeah, that part is an opinion. However, look how we're using a strong contrast transition within a body paragraph here. However, a resident and small business owner in the town provides a more credible source, right, is more credible in the awareness of the town's concern as compared to a representative who attended a few meetings in the town hall. So basically, the author's saying, hey, look, if they're both speculating, I'd rather trust the person from the town to know more about what are the concerns or tendencies of the people in this town. Great way to finish that paragraph. Very strong. All right. So then we would transition to the next paragraph. Another example, or, furthermore, the author provides support for his or her argument by referencing the construction jobs as temporary solutions to the sort of job crisis in the area. Great point to make here. I think it's my favorite point other than the study. All right, so now we need to explain how those construction jobs being temporary helps bolster this person's argument. Okay, so, the press release praises the new jobs. However, look, we get this transition statement again. The author is correct in the fact that the jobs will not create a boom in the district's economy or fill in the gap caused by the closures in the manufacturing plants, as the press release leads listeners to believe. So this is a nice use of evidence that we're supporting not only how it works within this passage, but also sort of pointing out how it sort of undermines the counterclaims made in the previous passage. Okay, the road construction does not solve the long-term issue of unemployment, which of course would definitely not support the town and could potentially harm it. In addition, look at this key language here. Another really great transition key phrase. In addition, the author of the letter counters the argument that new motels, restaurants, and gas stations, let's go on here, that the author of the letter, that the restaurants, gas stations along the highway will create permanent jobs for the residents of the town. That's strong evidence. We knew that was strong. She explains that, quote unquote, only minimum wage jobs will remain. I want you to notice that. Notice how we pull a quotation from the passage. It's the first time that we've quoted from the passage 2. We have cited evidence from that passage, but we've integrated it seamlessly into the paragraph here. And notice that it's not just an info dump. We continue to point out how all these details support her argument. All right, so if only minimum wage jobs will remain, we need to explain how that supports the author of passage 2 and undermines the author of passage 1. Okay, well, this is a valid argument also, as unemployed residents that need enough income to support a household would not be much better off. Yeah, that explains why this would be not beneficial. Good, great reasoning in that next sentence. Of course, it goes on to say, hey, even the restaurant and motel jobs that come are unlikely to be enough support for a family, right? Like, it's not the same as the manufacturing jobs. And then we finish with sort of the same idea that, hey, the people who were laid off from the manufacturing plants, they could have been in a much different situation, a much different skill set. They could be in a much different sort of scenario in terms of the income that they need, right? So all those facts undermine her argument Representative Wall's argument that this would be beneficial and definitely provide support for the author of passage 2. Okay, so the last paragraph we know is going to be now this really strong point. And what's nice about this is that if you were thinking about having like another paragraph just for the positive things that the author of passage 2 provides, and then a final paragraph that sort of points out the flaws with passage 1, you could kind of accomplish both of those in one paragraph in this instance, because the author of passage 2 sort of makes that move for you. So we've got to piggyback on that move. All right, so the study. The study is absolutely the biggest piece of evidence that will support the author of passage 2. So our author of passage 2, concedes that some of what Representative Walls said was true. But she points out that that study has a very clear additional finding that does not support Walls' argument. And now who seems way more credible now? Walls, who left that out, or the author of passage 2, who included both things, who included both the parts of the argument that sort of, would negatively affect her own position, but then provides the sort of full complement of details, right? Okay. Absolutely, the author of passage 2 seems way more credible for including all that information. But now we have to explain it. We have to explain how the full findings of this study support the author of passage 2. Well, we do get that it's a proven fact. Maybe we could say that the study appears to be credible since multiple people have access to it and have seen it. We get credibility here, right? So then we use that to continue on and say, hey, this seems like it's a little bit more of speculation, but based on this study and based on the author's previous speculation, sort of tying it together, we say that it does seem more reasonable that they will stick to the main highway and not come into the town, right? That they'll just bypass the town on that nice new highway and never come in on those small roads to see our local businesses, right? So we tie that all back in to see how this would support the author of passage 2. All right, so we have nailed it. We've provided an introduction that summarized and introduced our thesis. We provided 3 strong body paragraphs that center on pieces of evidence from both passages actually, and that use reasoning and logic to tie that evidence to our central thesis that paragraph 2 is the much better supported option. Now, we need to come up with a conclusion, right? And in our conclusion, we're going to summarize our thoughts on passage 1, and more importantly, our thoughts on our chosen passage as well. Notice that we use another great contrast transition keyword to kick this paragraph off. Despite the argument and evidence given by the press release, it appears that the letter to the editor offers a stronger case. That is a recapitulation, emphasizing our core thesis a second time. Fantastic. Now, let's continue. The author's ideas are backed up by logical explanations and facts with a few speculations. Notice how the author snuck that in there, right? Let's say the good stuff first and just kind of let the latter bit sort of fall off at the end. We got great facts and reasoning, and a couple speculations, right? Kind of like it's just kind of snuck in there, right? To where we don't really see it. We focus more on the primacy of the initial statements. Okay, let's keep reading. Another contrast keyword. Though the press release offers some fact, it is mainly specced with anticipations and hopes, driven to overshadow any doubts and quell any concerns. Notice how that sentence construction does something very similar, right? This time, we kind of throw away at the beginning our concession. Yeah, it offers some facts. But even that language, it's always like we're already gearing up to knock it down. Yeah, it's some facts, but it's anticipations, it's hopes, right? Like it's just wild speculations that, yeah, this will probably happen with really no support. Great sort of juxtaposition of those two sentences and how they operate. Fantastic. All right, so let's hammer it home. Let's continue to drive home, why we, as the authors of this statement, really support passage 2. Well, it's a business owner. It's a local person, somebody who has more firsthand opinions. All of those point to the credibility of that author of passage 2. Now, let's drive that nail home here as to why we didn't really find passage 1 as credible. Well, the press release is an elected representative who just came in for a couple town halls. Not quite as, not quite as, she's not quite as sort of interwoven into the fabric of this community, right? Which is a potentially big problem here, right? Maybe she doesn't really know what their issues are as much as she might want to. All right, so look how we finish this. Although both parties may well have the best interests of the district in mind, and either position could be correct. I love that balance, right? That shows credibility. That helps your essay big time. You're like, yeah, it could be true. But based on what we know now, it's the second letter that provides the better supported argument, right? Fantastic. It's a really well-constructed essay. Even if there are a couple points that we said, you know what, I can improve this here or here, it's a great example of what you should strive to do on your RLA extended response section of the GED test. All right. Let's do one last sort of sweep through why this was such a good essay. I know we really went into it in depth, but let's talk about some of the specific moves one more time before we wrap things up. So why did it get a perfect score? Well, the author had a clear argument. It was clearly stated. Right? We can't stress enough how important it is to clearly state your thesis. Also, that author used specific details from the text to support that position. Absolutely clutch. We also, supported this argument by showing how one passage had stronger arguments than the other, and by using logic and reasoning as well. Very, very clutch here. We also pointed out, as much as our chosen position was great, we pointed out how the opposing point of view was weak, right? It had weak support, it had speculation, it didn't have as much fact. Absolutely something that goes a long way to making this a highly scored essay. Good job. Now, not only did the author deal with those elements well, but the author also had very good organization. We saw that we had a thesis early on. Right? We had that argument early on. Right? We developed that argument throughout the body paragraphs. We had a transition. Could have improved a couple, but at least we had one. Right? We had a nice flow. Okay? We had evaluation and analysis of the elements from the passage. We didn't just state what was mentioned in passage 1 and 2 and then leave it behind. We definitely dealt with each and every claim that we made by analyzing it. Right? We had evaluation and analysis. Absolutely something that we want to do on our own essays. We had a strong conclusion that restated the core argument and thesis. Absolutely something we need for organization and development. We also had a very formal style and tone, right? Nothing flippant or frivolous, right? Everything was serious, formal, great language. Awesome. Okay, so did we spot any grammatical errors? Well, we know we would proofread at the end. We didn't really see much of that stuff. We also saw a lot of different sentence structures, and they were all correct. No huge grammatical errors. Right? We saw, especially at the end, how those two very different sentences were juxtaposed. One that branched right, one that branched left, right? And one that kind of threw away something at the end and also kind of tossed something away at the beginning. Great variance there. We had, the writer there had very nice, formal, clear language. Nothing overly wordy or verbose or bombastic, right? It was very, very standard and clear, great language here. Also, like we said, no huge grammatical or spelling errors. Fantastic. As much as we can limit those, we want to. No wordiness, no awkward run-on long sentences, right? They were very compact and concise. We avoided all that bad stuff. Very well done. Of course, we had proper punctuation between clauses, right? Nothing stood out glaring to me. I was mostly reading for content, which the essay graders will too, but nothing glaring in terms of a comma splice or whatever, right? It was pretty good. Awesome. And of course, overall, we had a very balanced, right? The response was appropriate. It was very balanced for how it evaluated the two passages. Definitely what we want for this type of passage. Okay, so now you've seen how you're going to attack the extended response section on the RLA portion of the GED test. Let's just quickly recap what we went through today. We analyzed a couple arguments, a couple passages, and even more than that. And we thought about how to outline, how to organize and develop a really effective response to the standard prompt that we're never going to have to read some of that language again, because we know we don't have to waste time on that for this portion of the GED test. We also talked about what we need to do so that there's no ambiguity, like no mystery about what are the concrete specific things we need to do well on the extended response portion of the RLA GED test. All right, you're not done. We definitely encourage you to practice this. Take a look at some sample prompts, go through the outlining process, write up something, right? We definitely want you to go through that. Practice, is how we reinforce the concepts that you have learned here today. So we definitely encourage you to do that. Don't forget too that you can always respond, right? You can always send us questions, concerns to this email address here. Okay, so if anything comes up as you're working on your essay and you want some tips or tidbits or feedback or whatever, please reach out to us. There'll be a really awesome, helpful GED teacher there to respond no matter what. I promise. All right, thanks for listening in on this GED live lesson on the RLA extended response section. We can't wait to see you in some other of our live and recorded lessons. Take care and happy studying.